Hello, everyone. My name is Mauricio Duarte. For those that might be tuning in for the first time or that might be hearing my voice for the first time, I will introduce myself and I'll also introduce Pierre from Gavel today. As I mentioned, my name is Mauricio Duarte. I've been a lawyer for the last 12 years. I've been working in legal technology for the last 8 years. And obviously, things are getting crazy. Right now, I'm the chief operating officer of a technology company based in Denver, Colorado called A2J Tech. But at the same time, I still have an off-council partner role with the law firm I helped started a few years back, in which we focus on helping technology startups with venture capital and private equity needs. So today I'm very excited to talk with Pierre, the Chief Technology Officer at Gavel. Pierre, welcome, and maybe you want to introduce yourself to the audience that might be listening in for the first time.
Yes, thank you, Mauricio. Really great to be speaking with you today. So my name is Pierre. I'm the CTO at Gavel. I have a career 20 years in technology, spanning big technology companies and startups. But my thread here is I've always built AI systems. So my career started at Microsoft deploying machine learning models for predictive medicine into hospitals. That led me to multiple big commercial consumer products, including Xbox, where we're building AI gaming agents. I worked at Amazon, where we're building early AI for package routing. I was the founder of Amazon Prime Video Sports. And then 7 years ago, I started my journey into startups. I've built a company backed by Jeff Bezos that deploys AI for supply chain 7 years ago. And 3 years ago, I had the call for access to justice. Mauricio, I think A2J stands for access to justice. And I think joined forces with Dorna, who's the CEO of Gavel, and we thought deeply about how can we use technology to actually help lawyers meet the unmet demand for legal services.
No, thank you for that, Pierre. And I think that obviously when we talk about technology, there are broad considerations, but I think today we want to make it grounded on AI because everyone's talking about AI, and I'm a bit of a realist and a pragmatic individual. When I say AI has not necessarily been around since 2019, it has been around since even the 90s. So AI is not necessarily just starting out. The thing that it catapulted everything was the existence of large language models, obviously starting with ChatGPT. Now we're hearing about the competition and the arms race between different AI models, but everyone's thinking of large language models. But I would say, Pierre, for those in the audience that may not necessarily understand the different layers of artificial intelligence, when someone says AI, what should they be understanding from that concept? Some of the practical uses, I would say in legal, but there might be other uses that you have seen. So let's just start with contextualizing our audience when we say AI, that is not only large language models, but different variations of that technology, in instance.
Right. Yeah, there's been many evolutions, obviously, as you said, since the early 90s. I think the basic construct of AI is in opposition to, I would say, traditional software and traditional programming, which is very declarative, right? You instruct a machine to perform functions and tasks in a specific order that you prescribe and you code yourself. AI is here to actually learn patterns from human and predict what to do based on the patterns that were learned, right? So, when I started my career at Microsoft Research, AI for me was training machine learning algorithms on past observations from patients and their symptoms and what the actual predicted disease was, and so or the predicted condition. And so the machine was learning these patterns and trying to recognize outcomes the way a human doctor would. Um, I think the evolution we've seen in the past 3 years is, what we call large language models, but there's been many evolutions of generative AI, whether it's generative language, generative code, generative, images, videos, right? This is basically the same principle of, analyzing a lot of data and predicting how to generate something the way a human would. However, the big difference is those have become very generalized models, right? So in the past, I had to train specific models to, be good at disease prediction, or I had to be training model for package routing, and I had to be training models for, video analysis, right? And to some extent, the language models now it becomes more just generic operating system. on which you can ask to do a specific task, and it's able to reason based on a very large amount of data as to what to do with that task. So that's really shifted the paradigm from having deep specialists like myself actually to train those models to having consumers, well, I would say technically trained like lawyers, to be able to prompt the system and get results that are very specific to a specific context.
And I think that's a good segue to my next question, that Pierre, because you mentioned something that I think it's important, and you mentioned AI basically gives you a probability of the outcome, in a sense that it needs to be trained or have enough context, in a sense. And that is one of the things that when I interact with other colleagues or lawyers, or when I'm working on projects using AI, people think that it's just about adding any layer on top of it and it will figure it out. But probably my question to you is understanding that there's a probability aspect to it. And if you give it context, you train it, you refine it, you will have better outcomes. Maybe you can help me understand, or in your experience, where's the gap between using traditional AI systems versus those that are built for the legal world, in a sense? Do you think that the value comes because of that fine tuning? Do you think that we're maybe looking at a trend that, let's say, lawyers themselves will take on that role of fine tuning and giving it context so it has better results? And maybe we can talk a bit more about that on how say, generic models that, as you mentioned, maybe are operating systems now versus what is truly required for them to be successful in real world legal work, Pierre, that I think there's a lot of disconnect sometimes where people try to use those generic systems, but may have some input on that.
Well, that's specifically, I would say, what we do day to day at Gavel is go beyond just the generic language model to, task specific agents that have personalized content.
Mm-hmm.
So what this means really, if you start opening the hood between of all these legal specific tools, right? You have Gavel, you have Harvey, you have Spellbook, and so on and so forth. What the key difference here is going beyond what the language model gives you, which is average over all the contracts that are in the public domain. What ChatGPT tell you statistically is the most probable clause you would put there.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. In fact, I've used this myself. Sometimes I receive contracts and I have put them in ChatGPT and asked, can you tell me if it's market standard, right? That works pretty well. But evolving to having an assistant or an agent that knows me and my working context specifically and knows to do specific tasks very well, right? And so there's a difference between, what's market standard and also, with this client, given the leverage they have with the opposing party, given what I know about the client and the situation, here's what I should do in this specific situation. And so if you look at these tools, including Gavel, it's kind of a layered cake, right? You have obviously the basic models that, right? It's not that we've trained the large language models ourselves. Harvey hasn't either, right? Mm-hmm. It is using, OpenAI and Anthropic and Gemini under the hood. However, on top of it, there is what we call an agentic workflow design, right? So the basic idea is here to bring expertise from lawyers as to what's the best way to work in certain situations, right? So I receive a contract. What is it to review a contract in a specific legal area? Like, what are the type of terms I need to spend on? How do I break it down between generating red lines, but also adding clauses, adding comments, summarizing, writing a summary to my counterparty so they have a full understanding of where I'm coming from. So breaking the workflow into specific tasks that are distributed between agents is what we call the agentic workflow design. So this is obviously where applications built on top of large language models add a lot of value. And then the other part is context engineering. How do we actually model and understand the full context, right? You may attach email from your clients, right? You may attach other documents that you feel are good standards from the firm. You may actually describe guidelines on how to work, right? Mm-hmm. And so how do you transform, this generic context into high signal that we can pass to large language models to really do a strong, accurate job the same way an associate at a law firm would do. I think in a nutshell, right, this is what goes on into all these tools, and this is what makes the difference between can I just use Claude or ChatGPT for analyzing a contract and actually getting agents to do real work the way you do would inside the company.
Here, and with that, I have a follow-up question that I think it's something that I have seen slowly started to be discussed in the, I would say, the legal tech Reddit world. It's about, okay, you have large language models, but within those specifically, I would use Claude as a reference. You can build skills, or you can build sub-agents. You can build things that are specific to your context, depending on, let's say, your processes or your, let's say, organizational policies and some of those components. Do you think that we are at a stage that the successful technologies that are built for the legal world will give you that customization flexibility? Do you think it should be on the provider? Maybe your thoughts on that? Because, for instance, I have seen a few discussions going around and saying, do we actually need those legal tech tools anymore? And can we just create our own skills and our subject? Obviously, requires a bit of a technical learning curve on that front, but maybe you have a few thoughts on saying, hey, you can do it on your own, but also there's legal tech tools that will do that for you, but we can allow you to also customize based on additional context that happens based on additional practice areas that you develop in your law firm. Then maybe you have a few thoughts on that just to provide more to the debate that has been going on in the last few weeks with Claude's legal plugin and some of the other things that have happened recently here.
Of course. Where do I start? There's a lot to unpack in your question. Um, so maybe one topic is, can I vibe code Harvey? Right? Like this is kind of a headline we I think every week someone on LinkedIn saying, "Hey, see my vibe code Harvey." And there's analogies I can give you even within Gavel where we do vibe code a lot of tools ourselves, right? And there's a place and time for these things, right? What do we vibe code often? We vibe code often prototypes that we want to show to our users, right? To do some research and testing. Like, do you think you could work with a tool like that, right? Back in the days, creating a prototype was actually labor intensive. Like it required some designer or engineer to actually put the whole thing together. That's a click through prototype. And now you can have really quick iterations on discovering what's the best product for yourself using this vibe prototype. And so to some extent, when I see AI vibe coded Harvey, I think, hey, it's interesting because it can help discover, what workflows do lawyers really want to interact with, right? What do we vibe code as well? We vibe code a lot of back office tools, right, at Gavel. Like you think of tools that assist or support people or customer support team. That's really improved their productivity because generally those are tools that one are if they go down, it's not completely taking our business down, right? Like it's just more manual work going back to the old way of working. It's also tools that are very task specific, right? They're designed to do one thing, right? So for instance, we've outputted a tool that can add credits to a user if they feel they want more credits to test our platform. So very task specific. I think this is great. This is really improving productivity. I think where this falls apart when I read I've outcoded Harvey or I've outcoded Gavel, it's just think that these real AI applications built by the legal tech providers, right, are designed to work in many different conditions and nuanced conditions, right? So you can't underestimate the amount of engineering that goes into really analyzing the context and structuring the context in a way that's quickly accessible to an AI agent under many different circumstances in different legal areas. That's, I have to say, this is probably, 50% of our R&D budget goes into context engineering. Right? The other part is just the workflow integration with the actual tools, right? Like, working within Microsoft Word, right, I think is strong in our thesis as Gavel, right? Like, we don't want the lawyer to go outside of where they're already working. But Microsoft Word is really feature rich, right? And there's a lot of stuff that go in there in terms of organizing, styling, and all the features that come into a Word document, and integrating with that, right? is hard work. It's really hard work, hard engineering work, right? And so, can I draft a poorly formatted, mildly research specific, document? Yes, that's easy to vibe code, right? And if that's the path you want to go down to, that definitely makes sense. Can I build a generic purpose tool that is reliable, always available for my business, well integrated into where I work? That's complicated to build, right? And this is where companies like ourselves fill in the gap.
And thank you for that, Pierre. And I would say, as a believer that vibe code has its space, I do agree with you that when people just vibe code without understanding some of the code that is being built, eventually they create more problems. Not necessarily because AI is not necessarily creating something bad, but one of the things that I noticed with one in a project specifically, one of my developers flagged, hey, do you know that what he's incorporating right now in the code, that's a legacy approach. That is not the new standard. Going to your point, based on the probabilistic output and the prompt that I gave it, it was giving me a specific architecture, but it wasn't necessarily the most modern or the best industry standards to that. So I would agree with you that vibe coding has its place, it has its uses, but if you try to vibe code everything without necessarily auditing the code, understanding what was being built, and someone, again, that's why developers are still relevant to this day, is because they can give you, hey, the code is solid, or it might need a few optimizations. But I would agree with you that everyone's just throwing, I would say, the buzz around vibe code everything, but I would take a more conservative approach as someone that does vibe code and does understand code, that I don't advise just vibe coding everything. Going to your point, integrating it with other tools, creating those API connections, it requires some more technical abilities, but for those that have it, you're welcome to explore it even more. But now let's talk about another thing here that is connected. I know that we talked about vibe coding, creating your own tools in a sense, but one of the things that I've been noticing is that people don't seem to understand how to get an AI tool to operate at a different level when they are asked between fine-tuning, let's say, a model or a system versus retrieving, or what is called retrieval augmentation generation, or called RAG in a sense from its acronym. Like, you're basically going to a source of data or a source of truth in a sense. And maybe you can explain that difference between when people throw fine-tuning or RAG. What does that mean? What are the distinctions and what are the implications for a successful AI system to be operating? And maybe you can also share how do you approach it at Gavel between those two approaches. If it's fine-tuning a model, this is, let's say, retrieving information from a live data source, Pierre, and we can talk more about that.
Yeah, great question. Let me start with fine-tuning. So what does fine-tuning mean? So we already said that an AI model or language model is trained on a data set, right? It's actually generating statistically probable content, right? But it's statistics, right? So it could also deviate, and this is where you have the topic of hallucinations, right? It just decided to do something that's a little less probable, and suddenly it doesn't make sense to a human, right? When you fine-tune, in a way you retrain or you add another level of training to the same model to learn from a specific data set, right? So this is where I would say, I'm going to give you all my contracts and fine-tune that model using my personal contracts, so it learns how to statistically reproduce language that is available in this set of contracts, right? Now, it has fine-tuning, actually it's kind of following the other issue really is just fine-tuning is model specific, right? So we try to do that actually early stage Gavel. I remember when GPT, I think it was 3.5 that released, that was like kind of a big step function, right? And we said, oh cool, let's fine tune it and let's see if we can become better at legal stuff, right? And then the next model came out and realized, oh, actually all the effort we spent on fine tuning that one model was lost, right? And I think that becomes a very costly process over time, especially now where there's so many really great companies releasing new models very fast, right? It's just, you can't even fine tune fast enough to catch up with the next model coming out, right? So I think generally, the industry is kind of going past the fine tuning. I mean, there's definitely cases where it would make sense. but moving a lot more towards retrieval augmented generation. And actually, I think it's a much better method for legal where, sources, right, are really important, right? And you need to be able to quote your sources specifically, right? So what does RAG, retrieval augmentation, retrieval augmented generation actually means, right? It's like you would give a set of sources to your AI agents, and you would give it an ability to search your sources like you would do a Google search, right? It's just, the agent would then enter a workflow where it would realize, oh, I actually need to check if there is any reference to a confidentiality agreement in my context, right? So let me search for confidentiality and pull up all the clauses and all the context that reference that and try to make something out of it, right? And this is where, in our tools, in similar tools to Gavel, you would actually see specific quoted sources, right? That you can open up and actually see the document reference the same paragraph, right? This is coming from retrieval augmented generation. So this is where, it becomes really important when we say context engineering, right? Because the ability to create those search indexes at a certain scale, right? Like what we're shooting for is you can attach 10 gigabytes of data or like just point to a web folder, right? And have Gavel as a system just construct high signal context that is searchable, which is actually a hard problem. It's a really hard engineering problem, right? Because when you have a large data set, like where do you find the relevant information, and the most relevant to the query of the user is really the problem that we're ended up solving with Gavel. And then obviously, how do you integrate this search tool into your AI agents in a way that is effective? Is you're able to pull sources when you need them. You can recheck your sources, right? And then you can iterate on it, but within a certain time constraint, right? Is I think the art of actual engineering. Even though with these coding tools we're not engineering line by line anymore, but we're still designing systems and designing products that are here to achieve, I would say, high accuracy, right? When you give it large amounts of data to sift through.
Okay. No, thank you for that, Pierre. The follow-up that came up with that is understanding that distinction between fine-tuning and React. The other question that I have for you is, as you mentioned, you're not necessarily Gavel, where many legal tech companies are not building their own large language models. You're using some of the existing models. Some are lower cost, some have a higher cost, some are better for a certain type of work, and so on. What is the usual process of benchmarking and comparing, let's say, the different models and say, hey, seems like this model is performing better in X, Y, and Z. For instance, I think I mentioned this example to you and some of my other colleagues. I always use the Will Smith video benchmark and say, if you recall a few years back when AI was just starting out, people were posting a video of Will Smith eating pasta. That was like the initial of where AI was at that time. And now every single year, there's a new video of Will Smith eating pasta, and every single time it looks more realistic and more perfected over time. So in the mainstream world, it's used as that's the benchmark of where AI is right now. If it can perfect Will Smith eating pasta, same thing with let's say, the large language models and the technologies behind it. But maybe you can help us understand what's the process or how do you go about benchmarking the different large language models? Because as I said, you're not building your own, you're using from other providers. But what is that process and how you decide, hey, Claude or let's say ChatGPT, maybe some model, open source models might be better at this set of components and the type of work with fine tuning and RAG that we have just discussed here.
Yeah, exactly. So I think part of the engineering is, first of all, breaking down the AI assistant into subtasks, right? So we have this process of sub-agents that are designed to perform specific tasks, right? Some of it is, extract the structure of the documents and the context, right? Like recognize clauses, their relationship between a clause and a trigger, a clause and definitions, right? Like building this context graph actually is one task, right? You have tasks like summarizing, obviously. There's tasks like reviewing other parties' red line. There's a task like generate a red line. There's a task to generate a comment, right? And so there is there's two ways we benchmark it, but the gist is we benchmark task by task, right? Because just saying how accurate are you is kind of just too generic, right? So it's more how accurate are you at redlining a service agreement, right? Is the level of benchmarking we do. So there's one set of benchmarks we have, which is truly against human generated data. So we hired legal experts and we asked them a task, and we saw the result, and we asked the AI to do the exact same thing, and we compare. And that becomes, in technical terms, it becomes a search problem. So we're measuring precision and recall. Recall means how often did the AI do exactly the same thing as the human, and precision is how often did it do something that the human didn't do. Side anecdote, actually. Over the course of time, we're seeing the precision of lots of these AI tools lower. And when you look into it, it's not because of hallucination, it's because it's picking up inconsistencies in large documents that a human actually is really, has an disadvantage compared to a robot reading long documents in seconds, right? So that's one set of benchmark. The other, I think, is maybe more particular to Gavel. I think we've maybe invented something interesting here, but I was inspired by my time at Amazon. So at Amazon, I was building the AI package router, right? So the problem is, given orders coming one by one through the day, what is the best way to route them to lower your cost and increase your delivery speed at the end of the day? And so what we ended up doing at Amazon, we realized, well, actually, at the end of the day, let's retrain our AI on what happened during the day and try to tweak configurations of our AI models to actually have it improve day over day, right? And so what we do at Gavel, we don't train, obviously, on anyone's data here, but we have a way to replay some traffic from the past hours and see how, if we change the model, how more accurately do we perform on the tasks that were real, user scenarios that were actually in production using Gavel in the past few hours. So that's also a good way for us to measure improvements or detect drift as well, right? So if for some reason our system was compromised, we would actually see over the course of time that something's happening that was not planned by us.
Okay. And Pierre, I think that, let's say, we probably have a few minutes left, so I want to get to some other points. And I think the one thing that I always get asked, and again, I do help courts, legal aids, law firms, even my own law firm as well, when we're adopting those tools or other types of tools, the usual question that I always have or that comes up is, what are some of the red flags that we should be looking at? So what are some of the things that maybe we're not as technical as lawyers when doing technology procurement or technology buying? What would you say from your perspective that are red flags that people should be aware of when, let's say, trying to evaluate different AI systems or legal technology products and see if they should incorporate them? I think that's the first question. And then I want to ask a second question about data protection and cybersecurity, but let's start with that one and not the other one that I think it's also important for some of the audience that might be listening in today.
Of course, I think privacy and security was actually the first red flag that came to mind, right? So I'll start with this one because it's probably the most important. I think in the age of AI, I think it's becoming more and more important for everyone to really become more knowledgeable about privacy and security, right? I think these tools have access to a lot of data. They have capabilities that we didn't have a few years ago. And it's becoming critical to at least know the basics and understand how to evaluate solutions, right? Part of it, I would say the most important thing for lawyers to understand here is that there's such a thing as software supply chain, right? And what we typically mean by software supply chain is you're not only buying a solution from one vendor, right? When you buy a service from Harvey or Gavel, right? We're one of the parts of the solution, but obviously we have dependencies on other providers, right? Obviously we're using OpenAI and Anthropic, we're using Amazon Web Services as well, right? They're also part of the data processing pipeline, right? So asking the tough question about show me almost the supply chain and the lineage of data, where does data actually go, right? And who can do what with my data is really critical. And you have to go through that exercise, I think, a few times to just build that muscle of asking the hard questions, right? As simple as, okay, so what, Harvey or Gavel, what data do you actually send to OpenAI? Is it the full document? Is it just my prompts? Is there some type of anonymization? And then the very important question here to ask is there zero data retention at all levels? I think in a legal field, it's almost critical. Like, you don't want your client data, obviously, to be spread around the world in all these different providers, right? So, and zero data retention means, no one has rights to keep that data. You're in full control of when to keep and delete the data. And no one can train on your data, right? So there's no risk of your contracts being used to generate some outcome by one of the AI providers. So obviously, the advantage of lawyers, I think in general, is going through law school, you know how to interrogate. And I think I would just use these principles, right? Just ask the tough questions until your judgment is satisfied that this is foolproof. If you start seeing hand waving, this is probably a sign that there's something that's not really being talked about, right? So, and this is no joke. I mean, to be honest, the worst that can happen is data leakage, right? For your firm. So I would be very cautious about that.
Pierre, and one question with, let's say, following up with that, let's say now I'm seeing this trailer. It's not only about data, but it's also about let's talk about the agents that are being developed, like sub-agents, since people are now developing its own independent agents. And one of the big questions is, to what systems do you give them access to let's say, operate independently? So do you integrate it with your case management system? Do you integrate it with your email? Do you have to create a separate email? For instance, I've seen some of my friends that are in the technology space testing it out now have its own computer with its own email address, with its own Slack account, so they don't necessarily touch it. But maybe we can also talk a bit about that. If you're seeing a bit of a trend as well from a agent development, and also, let's say, adding some safeguards, some guardrails, some protection between the access that it also has to your own internal tools, not only about the data. Because I'm seeing that trend, and maybe you have also seen something else that people should be aware when, again, we talk about vibe coding everything. People want to vibe code everything, but there's sometimes there might be glitches. Even as good as AI might be, still could, say, have some glitches in the code and might have some vulnerabilities in the code architecture. But maybe you can talk a bit more about that here, or maybe red flag, where it's a concern on the security and privacy side as well.
Yeah, I think this is part of privacy and security literacy, right? At the end of the day, I think it comes down to access control and trust, right? By access control, I think it's very important to be sure that you're in control of what the AI tool is able to access, right? Again, a red flag would be, and I've seen many tools now that just have a access request and say, I want access, full permission to your email, right? To me, it's just, I'm never going to click that, right? I'm not ready for that. And I think good design patterns there for software companies actually to have layers of progressive trust, right? So I can start in a read-only mode, right, and review the outcome. And if I'm happy with it, I can just increase the level of permissions to my level of comfort, right? And so, yeah, trust is the other important one, right? A lot of us in the industry talk about OpenClaw, right, and what you can do with OpenClaw, and the fact that it has effectively, if you just set it up out of the box, there's full control of your computer is very scary, right? And there's certain lines I'm not going to cross, right? For instance, today, would I give an AI agent access to my email? No, because full access, right? Can it send emails on my behalf? No, because this is part of my identity, right? This is part of representing myself, right? And if it says something I don't want it to do, it could be very damaging, right? So not crossing that boundary. However, though, I love the analogy with software engineering. I think there's a lot of motions that happen in the legal industry that we've seen in the software engineering industry, just maybe 1 year earlier, right? When you look at the evolution of coding agents for software engineers, I think everybody had low trust at the beginning, including myself, right? And the way the systems would work is more into auto-suggest, right? I would suggest one line of code first, and I could review line by line what the AI is doing, and then it would suggest blocks of code, parts of a solution, and I would review block by block, right? And then now it reaches the point where it just can deliver the full solution. There is still human in the loop very often. Like I'm even talking to companies like Amazon and Microsoft, most often there's humans in the loop still, because you want to build trust that whatever has been done is actually up to your standards, right? And I think the last part of the equation is setting up the right guidelines, right? I think part of the trust is you know that if you give it the right guidelines, it's going to reproduce a result 100% of the time, right? And I think what's now in software engineering, what's bringing fully autonomous coding agents, because the engineers themselves have engineered in a way enough guidelines, enough context for these AI agents that we're feeling more comfortable that it has all the inputs they need to produce the result we would expect at the quality we'd expect. So kind of long-winded answer to say, access control, trust and guidelines, right? Or be able to set some constraints on these agents is some of the controls you need to have before you give it access to more stuff.
No, thank you for that, Pierre. And I have two final questions. One of them that I think it goes perfectly to what you do at Gavel, and then another one that is like the dreaded question that I've been hearing since 2017. Lawyers gonna get replaced by AI, or judges are gonna get replaced by AI. But I want to leave that to the end. I think that one of the things that in my personal experience when using AI, I've been struggling with is complex logic, and conditional logic. Okay? We're not talking about, let's say, sophisticated formulas or calculations. It's more about if this individual has the following set of conditions, I want to have this document, or if this individual fits this category, I need to add certain sections or draft certain clauses. One of the things that I have, and the reason why I like Gavel is because you can create that conditional logic. But it seems like AI is still struggling at times when I try to do the same thing. And maybe you can give me a bit of your perspective of where document automation is heading, just because many lawyers, I would say most lawyers depend heavily on drafting documents, contracts, pleadings. So it's very document heavy. And if you see right now that either the trend of document automation is changing, or would you say that based on some things that you're seeing, AI does struggle with conditional logic, so maybe that piece of setting up the logic is not going away, but maybe the testing and some of the other components could be enhanced by AI. But I wanted to touch on that because personal experiences of struggling sometimes with setting up systems with conditional logic and document generation. But obviously, you're probably the expert since you do that at Gavel. So I'll give the floor to you, Pierre, then we can talk about the last final question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for pointing that out. I think that's one of the differences of Gavel, right? But to your question, right, describing logic, conditional logic, like rule-based logic, right, is what AI really struggles with, right? Because it's statistically generating an outcome, right? But it also means that statistically it can deviate from precise logic, right? Like really rules in the traditional coding sense of the term, right? And so this is where I think we still very much believe that there's a place for rule-based automation in the legal field, right? Because in certain cases, you don't want to completely invent a new draft. There's no nuance. You just want to follow a set of rules, right? If client is foreign and their spouse is foreign and they're employed and their employer is foreign, then generate this type of clauses in this specific formats, right? And so I think this is where the power of Gavel workflows exists. And there, the AI is not involved in the generation of the document itself, right? But what we've discovered is we can use AI to help draft the logic, right? So when, initially it would be very complex to extract all these entities like, client spouse, client spouse employer, and the relationship between all these things and the conditions. Now AI is actually pretty good at generating this logic, like AI is good at generating code. So this is part of the Gavel workflows offering, is just making this rule-based generation more accessible to all when it makes sense. And the benefit of rule-based generation obviously is you have very deterministic same output every single time, and you don't need to double check every single word that the system has generated. And then on your, maybe I don't know if you want to ask it formally, but your second question was, is there room for lawyers in the world?
Yeah, I think that you brought up something to provide the context of my question is, as I mentioned, I always have been hearing that AI will replace lawyers. And the one thing that I've been actually noticing as a lawyer myself is I'm not afraid of technology. I'm not afraid of embracing technology. And I think you brought up something very important, that is subject matter experts are still valuable and are still relevant, either if it's for fine tuning or for understanding your workflows, like subject matters are still relevant. But from your perspective, what's going to be then the role of attorneys with now understanding that AI is there? I do agree to some extent. Again, I won't necessarily try to hide the reality that there's going to be some entry level positions that maybe you will need as much, because you will have some AI tools that can perform or give you what a entry level position would give. But now, for those lawyers that maybe have a few years under their belt or have subject matter expertise on specific areas here, where are you looking that is trending from your perspective? And you talk about the healthcare industry. By developing that, that doesn't mean that we don't need doctors. We have the tools, but that doesn't mean the doctors are going away immediately. But maybe you have your own thoughts about the relevant subject matter experts and the role of lawyers now navigating this systems of AI, and AI to some extent delivering certain things at a high quality, but other things that still require some work to be perfected and optimized over time. Yeah.
Yeah, we're definitely in a world in transition here, right? I think, there's room for lawyers in the world. I think we're in the middle of a change in skill set required and a change in type of work. I really want to draw an analogy on what's happening to software engineers because, like, personally, in my day-to-day job, the industry has gone through massive transformation, right? And it's very obvious. If you think about what a software engineer does, right? Like, obviously, it's not writing assembly code anymore, right? It's not writing bits or punch cards. Like, even the skill set there has completely changed over the course of 50 years. But no, it's not even writing code line by lines, right? So the craft of, typing, characters on the screen to construct a code block is going away, right? What is changing though is the skill set is going more towards system level work, right, and more judgment based work, right? The ability to engineer the right context for your agents, the ability to give them the right instructions in plain language, right? The ability to actually merge multiple agents working together, right? Like you're becoming more of a work coordinator. And obviously the engineering fundamentals behind it don't change, right? Like how to architect good systems, right, is something you learn in engineering school that just doesn't change fundamentally. Just the skill and the craft has changed. And what that enabled in the software engineering industry is now we're actually developing technology much faster, right? If you look at the pace of how many code commits are pushed by developers, right? On average, it's 5 or 10x year over year, right? Just because of all these tools reaching the inflection points. As a result, we're developing technology much faster. We're also ramping up the technology curve much faster. We're developing drugs faster. We're able to, advance the capabilities of our AI models much faster, right? So this is accelerating, but there's room for software engineers. They just change the type of work and their velocity. In the legal field, it's the same, right? I think we're progressively going to go away from, drafting contracts and reviewing contracts line by line, right? And the work will become more at the judgment level, at the system level, right? At the negotiation level, perhaps, right? At the strategy level. I think also, the reason why I think you and I are actually speaking together is because of our belief in access to justice, right? And the fact that despite the fact that we have plenty of lawyers, there's only 10% of legal demand in America that's met, so 90% unmet, right? And so perhaps by being more efficient, by the fact that I can actually draft maybe 10 agreements a day instead of one, right? Or review 10 clients' cases a day instead of one, then I can actually branch out and do the right thing and actually help people who need access to justice have access to justice.
And here with that, let's say to wrap it up, just because I know that we have a few minutes left, from your perspective, and you touch upon access to justice, and I think that I would be probably, I'll get crucified if I don't pay this question. One of the things that I've been noticing in the access to justice space is there is a bit of a concern on having, let's say, chat-based solutions or, let's say, AI solutions giving any type of legal advice. And there's obviously discussion about what's the practice of law in the U.S. that it has more restrictions than in some other countries. But from your perspective, are those is that criticism warranted about hey because of the fine tuning discussion that we had earlier today? Do you think that there are still some sensitivities around putting, chat-based solution that gives you legal advice? Because I also saw that there's an initiative right now being discussed in Congress in New York, I think as well, that AI will not be able to provide legal advice because it's not a licensed attorney.
Yeah.
So we are adding, obviously, that additional layer of obstacles, but maybe from your perspective, from an access to justice perspective, are there things that you have concerns with, or that people should be more cautious, or just take a closer look at the performance of those tools or solutions that you put out there for helping users?
No, absolutely. I think this is where legal experts need to lead the way in showing their clients and the world, right? What how to use legal services at scale, but with expertise behind the scenes, right? The real danger is, like someone who's uninformed or uneducated just get random legal advice. That's actually bad advice, right? That can lead to severe consequences, right? Because it could even be illegal, right? If the AI hallucinates, right? So, I think, however, though, there needs to be some way to bridge that gap and teach and develop actually solutions for consumers to have better access to legal services in a way that's more self-service, but in a way that's backed by real legal expertise, right? And one analogy I give is I often laugh at I have family members who love the Dr. Google or Dr. ChatGPT, right? And so very quickly, every symptom you have, you're thinking you have cancer, right? And I think, the same applies for self-service legal services. Like, how do you build actually something that is trustworthy, right? That consumers know and recognize, have this label that says, okay, this is real legal advice, even though I'm talking to technology because that's the way it scales, but at least I'm talking to technology that has the knowledge and the expertise and the safeguards provided by real human experts to actually get, real consultation as opposed to Dr. ChatGPT, right?
No, and with that, Pierre, I think that from my end, it has been a great discussion. I think that we were able to balance the technical versus the non-technical. So I appreciate your time today. Any final words from your end, Pierre, that you think people should be, mindful of AI? Obviously, things are going to be changing seriously every single hour. But any final thoughts before we close off for today, Pierre?
Educating ourselves and communicating, I think, is key right now. The industry is changing so fast, and it's almost becoming a full-time job to keep up with innovation, right? So the more we have this center of expertise provided by ourselves and the ability to exchange what's worked, what hasn't worked, will accelerate the right adoption of AI in the industry, as opposed to buzzwords and dictating where to go.
No, thank you, Pierre, and thank you for everyone that tuned in today to my discussion with Pierre, the CTO at Gavel. Again, if you're interested about what they're doing at Gavel, that they have multiple products and multiple offerings, I always remind everyone to go to gavel.io, and which you can see some of their solutions that they have available. In my case, if you're interested of seeing what we do at A2J Tech, again, we don't have a product, but we try to help legal aids, law firms, in courts with technology projects and initiatives. You can visit us at www.goa2jtech.com. Thank you for that, Pierre. We'll see you in the next discussion, and we hope everything goes well with the next innovation wave coming at Gavel.